Whitmore Estates sat like a monument to everything Lila had never been allowed to touch. Marble floors gleamed under chandeliers that cost more than most people earned in a year. Oil paintings lined the hallways, each one a reminder that beauty and worth were the only currencies that mattered in this house. And Lila had never possessed either. She spent most of her childhood in the East Wing, in a room her mother called appropriate for her condition. It was smaller than the guest suites, tucked away where visitors wouldn't see her. The walls were cream-colored and bare. The furniture was functional. There were no flowers, no personal touches, nothing that suggested anyone actually lived there. Just a bed, a desk, and the kind of silence that made you forget what your own voice sounded like. Her older sister Savannah's room, by contrast, was a shrine. Rose-colored walls, a four-poster bed draped in silk, a walk-in closet bigger than Lila's entire space. Savannah got piano lessons, writing lessons, etiquette coaches who taught her how to hold a champagne flute and smile without showing too much emotion. She was being sculpted into something valuable. Lila was just being kept alive. "You're not eating again." Lila looked up from her untouched breakfast tray. Her mother stood in the doorway, arms crossed, lips pressed into that familiar line of disappointment. Evelyn Whitmore wore a cream blazer and pearls even though it was barely 8 in the morning. She always looked like she was about to attend a board meeting or a funeral. Sometimes Lila thought those were the same thing to her. "I'm not hungry," Lila said quietly. "You're never hungry. That's why you look like that." Lila didn't ask what that meant. She already knew. Too thin, too pale, too weak. The doctors had given her condition a name once, something long and medical that her mother refused to repeat. All Evelyn cared about was that it made Lila expensive. Medication, specialists, hospital stays that drained money and attention away from more important things, like Savannah's debut, like the family's reputation. "Dr. Carver is coming this afternoon," Evelyn said. "Try to look presentable." "I always do." "You look sick. There's a difference." Evelyn left without waiting for a response. She never did. Conversations with Lila weren't actually conversations. They were declarations, corrections, reminders that Lila's existence was an inconvenience everyone had learned to tolerate. Lila pushed the tray aside and walked to the window. The garden stretched out below, perfectly manicured, dotted with roses that someone else planted and someone else trimmed. She used to go down there when she was younger, before her mother decided it wasn't safe for her to be seen wandering around. Now she just watched from above. Like everything else in her life was something she could observe but never touch. Savannah's laughter drifted up from somewhere outside. Bright, confident. The kind of sound that made people turn their heads and smile. Lila wondered what that felt like. To walk into a room and have people glad you were there. By the time Dr. Carver arrived, Lila had changed into a plain sweater and jeans, brushed her hair, and arranged herself on the edge of her bed like she was waiting for an inspection. The doctor was kind enough, older, with gray hair and glasses that slipped down his nose when he leaned forward to check her pulse. But even his kindness had limits. He worked for her mother. And her mother paid him to keep Lila functional, not happy. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Fine." "Sleeping?" "Enough." "Eating?" Lila hesitated. "Enough." Dr. Carver made a note on his tablet, his expression unreadable. "Your latest blood work came back. Your levels are stable, but just barely. You need to be more consistent with your medication. I take it every day." "I know, but your body isn't responding the way we'd like. We may need to adjust the dosage again." More medication. More money. More reasons for her mother to look at her like she was a bill that kept coming due. "Okay," Lila said. "Doctor." Carver closed his tablet and stood. "I'll talk to your mother about the adjustments. In the meantime, try to rest more. And eat. You're too light." He left, and Lila was alone again. She lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster. She had memorized them years ago, 14 total, thin, branching out like veins. Nobody ever fixed them. Nobody cared enough to notice. Downstairs, she could hear voices, her father's low rumble, her mother's clipped tone, and then Savannah laughing again, saying something Lila couldn't quite make out. The sounds of a family that functioned, a family that worked, a family she didn't belong to. Dinner that night was the same as every other. Lila sat at the far end of the long dining table, across from Savannah, with her parents at the head. The food was elaborate, prepared by a chef her mother had hired from some restaurant downtown. Lila picked at her plate while Savannah talked about her day, about the charity luncheon she'd attended, about the new dress she'd ordered for an upcoming gala. It's custom, Savannah said, cutting into her steak with perfect precision, ivory silk with gold embroidery. The designer said it'll be ready in 2 weeks. It sounds lovely, Evelyn said, smiling in a way she never smiled at Lila. Richard Whitmore, Lila's father, nodded along but didn't say much. He rarely did. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with graying hair and the kind of face that looked stern even when he wasn't trying. He ran the family's real estate empire with the same detachment he brought to everything else: efficient, practical, emotionally unavailable. Lila, she looked up. Her mother was staring at her. Dr. Carver said you're not eating enough. I'm eating. Not enough to matter. Evelyn set down her fork. You need to take this seriously. We can't keep adjusting your treatment every few months because you won't cooperate. I am cooperating. Then why does he keep saying you're not improving? Lila didn't have an answer for that. Or maybe she did, but it wasn't one her mother wanted to hear. That sometimes the medication made her nauseous. That sometimes she was so tired she could barely get out of bed. That sometimes she didn't see the point in trying to get better when nobody actually cared if she did. I'll do better, Lila said quietly. Evelyn picked up her fork again. See that you do. The conversation moved on. Savannah started talking about a man she'd met at the luncheon, some investor's son who'd asked for her number. Evelyn perked up immediately, asking questions, offering advice, turning the whole thing into a strategy session. Richard listened with half his attention, occasionally glancing at his phone. Lila finished what she could and excused herself early. Nobody stopped her. Back in her room, she took her medication and climbed into bed, even though it was barely 8 o'clock. The pills made her drowsy, and drowsy was better than awake. Awake meant thinking. Thinking meant remembering that this was her life and it wasn't going to change. She didn't know how long she'd been asleep when the shouting started. At first, she thought she was dreaming, but then she heard her mother's voice, sharp and furious, coming from downstairs. Then her father's, lower but just as angry. Lila sat up, heart pounding, and crept to her door. This is insane, Richard. You can't possibly be considering this. I don't have a choice. You know what he's capable of. Then we give him Savannah. She's the one he asked for. He didn't ask for Savannah. He asked for a Whitmore daughter. And after what happened, we both know Savannah is too valuable to waste on him. Lila's stomach twisted. She pressed her ear to the door, barely breathing. So you'd rather throw away the sick one? Evelyn's voice was cold, bitter. The one who's costing us a fortune anyway? I'd rather make a smart decision. Blackwell is finished. Everyone knows it. He's blind, broke, and barely holding on to what's left of his empire. Marrying Lila to him solves 2 problems at once. It satisfies the alliance, and it gets her off our hands. There was a long pause. Then Evelyn laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was sharp, resigned, the sound of someone accepting something they hated. Fine, she said, but don't pretend this is anything other than what it is. We're throwing her away. We're being practical. We're being cruel. Then we're being cruel. I don't care. I want this done. Lila stepped back from the door, her hands shaking. She knew she shouldn't be surprised. She'd always known her family saw her as a burden, but hearing it said out loud, hearing her mother agree to it without even a fight, felt like something breaking inside her chest. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over until the words lost meaning and just became noise. The next morning, her mother came to her room before breakfast. Get dressed, Evelyn said. Something appropriate. We're going out. Where? You'll see. Lila didn't argue. She put on a simple dress, brushed her hair, and followed her mother downstairs. A car was waiting outside, sleek and black, with a driver who didn't make eye contact. Evelyn climbed in first, and Lila followed, sitting as far from her mother as the back seat allowed. They drove in silence through the city, past the expensive boutiques and restaurants Lila had never been inside, past the parks where families walked together like they actually liked each other. Eventually, the car pulled up in front of a tall building downtown, all glass and steel, with a lobby that looked more like an art gallery than an office. Where are we? Lila asked. Meeting your future husband. Lila's chest tightened. What? Evelyn didn't answer. She got out of the car and walked toward the entrance without looking back. Lila had no choice but to follow. Inside, they were led to an elevator that took them to the top floor. The doors opened onto a hallway lined with dark wood and soft lighting, the kind of place that whispered money and power. At the end of the hall was a set of double doors. Evelyn knocked once, then pushed them open without waiting for an answer. The office beyond was massive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. A desk sat in the center, polished and empty except for a single folder. And behind the desk, standing with his back to them, was a man in a black suit. He turned around. Lila had expected someone old, someone broken, someone who looked like the rumors said he should, but the man staring at her was none of those things. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a face that was too sharp to be handsome in any soft way. And his eyes weren't clouded or unfocused. They were clear, intense, fixed directly on her. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. His voice was low, calm, the kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to command attention. "And this must be Lila." Evelyn stepped forward, all business. "Mr. Blackwell, thank you for agreeing to meet." "I didn't agree to anything," Damien said. "You asked. I allowed it. There's a difference." Evelyn's smile tightened, but she didn't argue. "Of course. Well, as we discussed, Lila is suitable for the arrangement." "Suitable?" Damien's gaze shifted back to Lila. Interesting word. Lila didn't know what to say. She felt like an object being appraised, something her mother had brought in to see if it was worth the asking price. Damien walked around the desk, slow and deliberate, until he was standing directly in front of her. Up close, he was even more intimidating, not because he looked dangerous, but because he looked like he saw everything, like there was nowhere to hide. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked. Lila swallowed. "My mother said I was meeting my future husband." "And what do you think about that?" She hesitated. "I don't think my opinion matters." Damien's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Something that might have been approval, or curiosity, or both. "You're right," he said. "It doesn't. Not to them, anyway." Evelyn cleared her throat. "Mr. Blackwell, if we could finalize the terms—" "The terms are simple," Damien said, still looking at Lila. "Your family needs this alliance. I'm willing to provide it. In exchange, I get a wife. This one." "Agreed," Evelyn said quickly. Too quickly. Damien finally looked away from Lila, turning his attention back to her mother. "The wedding will be in 2 weeks. I'll handle the arrangements. You just need to make sure she shows up." "She'll be there?" "Good." Damien walked back to his desk and picked up the folder. "Then we're done here." Evelyn nodded, already turning toward the door. "Come, Lila." But Lila didn't move. She was still staring at Damien, trying to make sense of what had just happened, trying to understand why a man who was supposed to be blind and broken looked like he was the one in control of everything. "Lila," Evelyn said sharply. She followed her mother out, her mind spinning. In the car, Evelyn was on her phone immediately, texting someone, her fingers moving fast and angry. Lila sat in silence, replaying the meeting over and over. Damien's eyes. His voice. The way he'd looked at her like he was seeing something her family had spent years pretending didn't exist. "This is going to work," Evelyn muttered, more to herself than to Lila. "It has to." Lila didn't ask what this was. She already knew. She was the price, the sacrifice, the thing her family was willing to give up to save themselves. When they got home, Savannah was waiting in the foyer, arms crossed, looking furious. "You met him?" she demanded. Evelyn brushed past her. "It's done." It should have been me." "It wasn't. Deal with it." Savannah turned to Lila, her eyes blazing. "You think you're special now? You think marrying some washed-up crime lord makes you better than me?" Lila didn't answer. She didn't have the energy. "You're pathetic," Savannah spat. "You always have been." She stormed off, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Lila stood there for a moment, feeling nothing. She'd spent so long being nothing to these people that their anger didn't even register anymore. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur. Dress fittings she wasn't consulted about, guest lists she wasn't included in. A wedding being planned around her, not for her. The dress they chose wasn't even new. It was the one Savannah had been measured for months ago, back when everyone thought she'd be the one walking down the aisle. They had it altered to fit Lila, though it still hung loose in places where Savannah's curves would have filled it out. Lila tried it on the day before the wedding. She stood in front of the mirror in her mother's dressing room, staring at a stranger. The dress was beautiful, ivory silk, delicate lace, the kind of thing that should have made her feel like a bride. Instead, she felt like a costume, like she was playing a part in someone else's story. Evelyn stood behind her, adjusting the veil. "It'll do." That was all she said. "No, you look beautiful." "No, I'm proud of you. Just, it'll do." The wedding was held at the Whitmore estate, in the garden Lila used to watch from her window. Rows of white chairs filled with people she didn't know, flowers everywhere, expensive and perfect. A string quartet playing something soft and forgettable. Lila walked down the aisle alone. Her father was supposed to escort her, but at the last minute he'd been called away for some business emergency that apparently couldn't wait. So she walked by herself, in a dress that wasn't hers, toward a man she'd met once, while her family watched from the front row with expressions that ranged from indifferent to relieved. Damien stood at the altar, wearing a black suit that fit him like it had been made for this exact moment. He didn't look nervous. He didn't look happy. He just looked. Waiting. When Lila reached him, he extended his hand. She took it, and his grip was firm, steady, warmer than she'd expected. The officiant began speaking, but Lila barely heard the words. She was too focused on Damien, on the way he was looking at her. Not like she was sick, not like she was a burden, just looking. "Do you, Lila Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" She opened her mouth, and for a second she thought about saying no, about walking away, about refusing to be the thing her family traded for their own survival. But where would she go? What would she do? "I do," she said quietly. "And do you, Damien Blackwell, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Damien didn't hesitate. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Damien leaned in, and Lila closed her eyes, bracing herself. But the kiss was brief, almost formal, just a brush of lips that ended before she even had time to react. When she opened her eyes, he was already stepping back. The reception was worse than the ceremony. Lila sat at a table next to Damien while people came up to congratulate them, to shake his hand, to smile at her like she was something fragile they didn't want to break. Her family barely spoke to her. Savannah didn't even show up. Evelyn stayed for exactly 1 hour, then left with some excuse about a headache. By the time the last guest had gone, Lila felt like she'd been holding her breath for days. Damien stood and offered her his hand again. "Come on." "Where are we going?" "Home." She followed him to a car waiting outside, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. The driver opened the door, and Damien gestured for her to get in. She did, and he slid in beside her. The car pulled away from the estate, and Lila watched through the window as the only home she'd ever known disappeared behind them. They drove for what felt like hours, though it was probably less than 30 minutes. The city gave way to quieter streets, tree-lined and expensive, the kind of neighborhood where every house looked like it belonged in a magazine. Eventually, they turned into a long driveway that ended at a gate. The gate opened automatically, and they continued up a hill until a house came into view. Except, house didn't feel like the right word. It was massive, modern, all glass and steel and sharp angles that caught the fading sunlight. It looked like something out of a dream, or a nightmare, depending on how you looked at it. The car stopped in front of the entrance. Damien got out first, then held the door for her. Lila stepped out, staring up at the house, feeling impossibly small. "This is where you live?" she asked. "This is where we live," Damien corrected. He led her inside through a foyer that was bigger than her bedroom back at the estate, down a hallway lined with art she didn't recognize, and into a living room that overlooked the city below. The view was breathtaking. Light stretched out in every direction, glittering like something you could reach out and touch. "Sit," Damien said, gesturing to a couch. Lila sat. Damien stayed standing, his hands in his pockets, watching her. "You're probably wondering what happens now," he said. "I don't really have expectations." "Good. That makes this easier." He walked to the window, looking out at the city. "Your family thinks I'm finished, blind, broke, desperate. That's what I wanted them to think." Lila frowned. "What do you mean?" Damien turned back to face her. I spread the rumors myself. I wanted to see what they'd do when they thought I had nothing left to offer. And they showed me exactly who they were. They threw you away without a second thought. Lila's chest tightened. I don't understand. I'm not blind, Lila. I'm not broke. And I'm not desperate. He walked back toward her, slow and deliberate. I'm exactly where I want to be, and so are you. Why would you want me? Because they didn't. The words hit her like a punch. Not cruel, just honest. Painfully, perfectly honest. I don't need you to be perfect, Damien continued. I don't need you to be anything other than what you are. But I do need you to understand something. You're not their burden anymore. You're mine. And I protect what's mine. Lila stared at him, her mind racing. This didn't make sense. None of it made sense. I don't know what you want from me, she said quietly. Nothing, Damien said. Not yet, anyway. For now, just rest. Get used to being here. We'll figure out the rest as we go. He left her there, alone in the living room with the city glowing below. Lila sat for a long time, trying to process everything that had just happened, trying to understand how her life had gone from one cage to another in the span of a single day. But as she sat there, staring out at the lights, she realized something. This cage had windows. And maybe, just maybe, that was a start. Lila woke the next morning in a bed she didn't recognize, in a room so large it felt like she'd stumbled into someone else's life. The sheets were soft, impossibly soft, nothing like the stiff cotton she'd been used to. Sunlight filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, and for a moment she just lay there, disoriented, trying to remember where she was. Then it came back. The wedding. Damien. The house that looked like it had been ripped from the pages of an architecture magazine. She sat up slowly, her body stiff from tension she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The room was decorated in neutral tones, elegant but impersonal, like a hotel suite designed to look expensive without actually feeling lived in. There was a closet along one wall, doors slightly ajar, and through the opening she could see clothes hanging inside. Her clothes, she realized, or at least clothes that had been moved here from the estate. A knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she said, her voice rough from sleep. A woman entered, middle-aged, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a simple black dress and carried herself with the kind of efficiency that came from years of practice. "Good morning, Mrs. Blackwell," the woman said. "I'm Helen. I manage the household. Mr. Blackwell asked me to check if you needed anything." Mrs. Blackwell. The name sounded foreign, like it belonged to someone else. "I'm fine," Lila said automatically. Helen's expression didn't change. "Breakfast is ready downstairs whenever you're ready. Mr. Blackwell is in his office, but he'll join you if you'd like." "That's okay. I can eat alone." "As you wish." Helen moved to the closet, pulling the doors open wider. "I've organized your things. If anything is missing or if you need something specific, just let me know." Lila nodded, though she couldn't imagine needing anything. Her wardrobe back at the estate had been minimal. Practical clothes, nothing fancy, nothing that drew attention. Looking at the closet now, though, she saw unfamiliar items mixed in with her own, dresses she'd never seen before. Shoes still in boxes. A cashmere sweater in a shade of blue that made her think of the ocean. "I didn't bring all of this," Lila said. "Mr. Blackwell had some things sent over," Helen explained. "He thought you might need options." "Options?" Lila almost laughed. She'd spent her entire life with no options, and now she was supposed to believe she had them? Helen left her alone to get dressed. Lila showered in a bathroom that was bigger than her old bedroom, then pulled on jeans and a simple sweater, one of her own. She didn't touch the new clothes. They felt like a trap, like accepting something she hadn't earned and would eventually have to pay back. Downstairs, the house was quiet. Her footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors as she followed the scent of coffee to a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a restaurant. Stainless steel appliances, marble countertops, an island in the center with stools lined up like soldiers. A plate of food sat waiting on the counter. Scrambled eggs, toast, fresh fruit arranged in a way that seemed almost too pretty to eat. Lila sat down and picked at the eggs. They were good, better than anything the chef at the estate had ever made, but her stomach was still knotted from nerves. She managed a few bites, then gave up and just drank the coffee, black and strong, the only thing that felt real. "You should eat more than that." She turned. Damien stood in the doorway, dressed in dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked like he'd been awake for hours, sharp and alert, in a way that made Lila feel like she was still half asleep. "I'm not very hungry," she said. "That seems to be a pattern with you." He crossed the kitchen, poured himself a cup of coffee, and leaned against the counter across from her. His eyes were on her, steady and unreadable, like he was trying to solve a puzzle she didn't know she was presenting. "How do you know that?" Lila asked. "I know a lot of things about you. Your family wasn't exactly subtle." Lila set down her coffee cup. "What did they tell you?" "That you're sick, that you're expensive, that you're not worth the trouble." Damien's tone was flat, matter-of-fact, like he was reading items off a grocery list. "They made it very clear they wanted you gone." The words stung, even though Lila had already known them to be true. Hearing someone else say it out loud made it worse somehow, more real. "And you still married me," she said quietly. "I told you. I wanted to see who they'd throw away when they thought I had nothing. They chose you." "That told me everything I needed to know." "Which was what?" Damien took a sip of his coffee, considering. "That you were the one worth taking." Lila didn't know how to respond to that. She'd spent so long being told she was worthless that the idea of being worth anything felt like a lie. But Damien didn't look like he was lying. He looked like he meant every word. "I don't understand you," she said. "You don't have to. Not yet." He set his cup down. "I have a meeting this morning. Helen will be here if you need anything. There's a library on the second floor if you want something to do, or you can explore. This is your home now. You're not a prisoner." He left before she could ask what he meant by "not yet." Lila spent the rest of the morning wandering the house like a ghost. Every room was bigger than the last, decorated with the kind of taste that came from having unlimited money and someone else to spend it. There were guest rooms that looked like they'd never been used, a dining room with a table that could seat 20, a gym with equipment she didn't know how to operate, and the library Damien had mentioned, which turned out to be 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with more books than Lila had ever seen in one place. She pulled a novel off the shelf at random and curled up in a chair by the window. The book was good, something about a woman who left her life behind and started over somewhere new. Lila got through 3 chapters before she realized she hadn't retained a single word. Her mind kept drifting back to Damien, to the way he'd looked at her in the kitchen, like she was something he'd chosen on purpose instead of something he'd been stuck with. By the time Helen came to find her, it was past noon. "Mrs. Blackwell, there's someone here to see you." Lila's stomach dropped. "Who?" She didn't give a name, just said she was family. Lila set the book down, her hand suddenly cold. Family. That could only mean one person. She followed Helen to the front entrance, where Savannah stood in the foyer, arms crossed, looking around the house like she was cataloging everything she saw. She was dressed immaculately, as always, in a tailored coat and heels that made her look like she'd just stepped out of a magazine. When she saw Lila, her expression twisted into something ugly. "So this is where you ended up," Savannah said. "Nice. What are you doing here?" Lila asked. "I wanted to see for myself, see what kind of place a washed-up criminal could afford." Savannah walked deeper into the foyer, her heels clicking against the marble. "Turns out, it's not bad. Better than I expected, anyway. You should leave. Relax, I'm not staying long." Savannah turned back to face her, and there was something dangerous in her eyes. "I just wanted to make sure you understood something. This doesn't change anything. You're still the sick little sister nobody wanted. You're still a burden. The only difference is now you're someone else's burden." Lila felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the one that came whenever someone reminded her of what she was. But this time, something else stirred underneath it. Anger, maybe. Or just exhaustion. She was tired of being talked to like this. Tired of being treated like she didn't matter. "If that's all you came to say, you can go," Lila said quietly. Savannah laughed. "Look at you. One day in a new house, and you think you're somebody. You're not. You never will be. Is there a problem here?" Both women turned. Damien stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at them with an expression that was calm but somehow more threatening than if he'd been shouting. He descended slowly, each step deliberate, until he was standing beside Lila. Savannah's confidence wavered, just for a second. "I was just visiting my sister." "No, you weren't," Damien said. "You were trespassing and insulting my wife, which means you're done." "I have every right to—" You have no rights here. This is my home, and you're not welcome in it. He turned to Helen, who had been watching from the hallway. Escort her out. If she comes back, call security. Helen moved forward without hesitation. Savannah opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. She shot Lila one last venomous look before turning and walking toward the door. Helen followed, and a moment later the door closed behind them both. The silence that followed was heavy. "I'm sorry," Lila said. "I didn't know she was coming." "Don't apologize for her." Damien's voice was sharp, but not directed at her. "She doesn't get to come here and treat you like that. Not anymore." "She's always treated me like that." "Then it stops now." Lila looked up at him, surprised by the intensity in his voice. He wasn't just angry, he was protective, possessive even. Like Savannah had insulted something that belonged to him and he wasn't going to tolerate it. "Why do you care?" Lila asked. "Because you're mine now," Damien said simply. "And I don't let people disrespect what's mine." He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Like there was no question, no debate. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, Lila felt something shift inside her. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of something like it. The days that followed settled into a strange routine. Damien was gone most mornings, disappearing into his office or leaving the house entirely for meetings Lila wasn't invited to. She spent her time reading, wandering the property, trying to get used to the idea that this place was hers now. Helen checked on her regularly, always polite, always efficient, but never intrusive. It was like living in a hotel where the staff anticipated her needs before she even knew she had them. On the fourth day, a doctor arrived. Lila was in the library when Helen came to find her. "Dr. Monroe is here for your appointment." "What appointment?" "Mr. Blackwell scheduled it. He thought you should have a full evaluation." Lila wanted to argue, but what was the point? She followed Helen downstairs to a sitting room where a woman in her 40s waited, professional and composed, with a medical bag at her feet. "Mrs. Blackwell," the doctor said, standing to shake her hand. "I'm Dr. Monroe. Your husband asked me to come by and check on you." "I have a doctor," Lila said. "Dr. Carver, yes, I've reviewed his notes." Dr. Monroe gestured to the couch. "Please sit. This won't take long." Lila sat, feeling like a child being examined. Dr. Monroe asked the same questions Dr. Carver always asked. How was she feeling? How was she sleeping? Was she taking her medication consistently? Lila answered on autopilot, the same responses she'd given 100 times before. But then Dr. Monroe did something Dr. Carver never had. She actually listened. "Your blood work from last month shows some concerning trends," Dr. Monroe said, pulling up a tablet. "Your levels are stable, but barely, and your weight is too low for someone your height. Have you experienced any side effects from your current medication?" "Sometimes," Lila admitted. "Nausea, fatigue." "How often?" "Most days." Dr. Monroe frowned. "And Dr. Carver knew about this?" "I told him." "And he didn't adjust your treatment?" Lila shrugged. "He said my body just wasn't responding the way it should." "That's not an answer. That's an excuse." Dr. Monroe set the tablet down. "I'd like to run some tests, new blood work imaging, a full metabolic panel. And I want to try a different medication protocol, something that might work better with fewer side effects." "My mother won't pay for that," Lila said automatically. "Your mother isn't paying for this. Your husband is." Dr. Monroe's expression softened. "Mrs. Blackwell, you've been managing your condition for years with minimal support. That ends now. I'm going to make sure you have the best care available. But I need you to trust me and actually tell me when something isn't working. Can you do that?" Lila nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She wasn't used to doctors who cared about how she felt. She wasn't used to anyone caring about how she felt. Dr. Monroe scheduled a follow-up for the end of the week and left her with instructions to keep a daily journal of her symptoms. After she was gone, Lila sat alone in the sitting room, staring at the business card the doctor had left behind. Damien came home late that night. Lila was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a blanket, half watching a movie she wasn't really paying attention to. He walked in without saying anything, poured himself a drink from the bar in the corner, and sat down in the chair across from her. "Dr. Monroe came today," Lila said. I know. You didn't ask me if I wanted a new doctor. You needed one. Dr. Carver wasn't doing his job. How do you know that? Damien took a sip of his drink. I had someone pull your medical records. He's been putting you on the same medication for 3 years with no adjustments, no alternatives, nothing. He wasn't treating you. He was maintaining you. There's a difference. Lila pulled the blanket tighter around herself. My mother liked him. Your mother liked that he was cheap and didn't ask questions. It was harsh, but it was also true. Lila had always known her mother cared more about appearances than actual results. As long as Lila wasn't dying in a way that made the family look bad, Evelyn didn't care how miserable she was. Why are you doing this? Lila asked. Doing what? All of this. The house, the doctor, the clothes. You don't even know me. Damien set his glass down and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You're right. I don't know you. Not yet. But I know what your family did to you. And I know that if I don't step in, you're going to spend the rest of your life believing you're not worth saving. Maybe I'm not. You are. He said it with such certainty that Lila almost believed him. Almost. And I'm going to prove it to you, whether you like it or not. She didn't know what to say to that, so she just pulled the blanket tighter and went back to pretending to watch the movie. 2 weeks into the marriage, Lila's medication started to change. Doctor Monroe introduced a new protocol, something experimental but promising, and within days, Lila noticed the difference. The nausea faded. The constant exhaustion lifted just a little. She still wasn't healthy, not by any normal standard, but she felt less like she was dragging herself through every hour of the day. She started eating more. Not a lot, but enough that Helen stopped looking at her with quiet concern. She started sleeping better too, though the dreams were still strange. Dreams where she was back at the estate, trapped in her old room, pounding on the door while her family walked past without hearing her. One morning, she woke up early and found Damien in the kitchen, already dressed for the day, drinking coffee and reading something on his phone. He looked up when she walked in. You're up early, he said. Couldn't sleep. Bad dream. Lila nodded. She poured herself coffee and sat down at the island, watching him. He'd rolled up his sleeves again, and she could see the edge of a tattoo on his forearm, something dark and intricate she'd never noticed before. Can I ask you something? She said. Go ahead. Why did you really marry me? And don't say it's because my family threw me away. There has to be more to it than that. Damien set his phone down, considering her. You want the truth? Yes. Your family owed me a debt, a significant one. When they heard the rumors about me being finished, they saw an opportunity to settle it cheaply. They offered me a marriage alliance, thinking I'd take Savannah and call it even. But I didn't want Savannah. I wanted to see which daughter they valued least, so I told them I'd take whoever they chose, and they chose you without hesitation. So I was a test. You were a measurement of their character, not yours. Damien leaned back in his chair. The way people treat the things they think are worthless tells you everything about who they are. Your family failed that test spectacularly. And what did that prove? That you deserved better, and that I was the only one willing to give it to you. Lila stared at him. You don't know me well enough to know what I deserve. Maybe not, but I know you deserve better than them. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even really kindness. It was just cold, brutal honesty. And somehow, that made it easier to believe. What happens now? Lila asked. Now, you get better. You figure out who you are when you're not under their control, and you let me handle the rest. Handle what? Damien's expression darkened, just for a second. Your family thinks they can discard you and walk away clean. They're wrong. But that's not something you need to worry about. There was something in his voice that made Lila's chest tighten. Not fear exactly, but awareness. That the man sitting across from her wasn't just protective. He was dangerous. And whatever he was planning, it wasn't going to be gentle. I don't want you to hurt them because of me, she said quietly. I'm not doing it because of you. I'm doing it because of what they did. Damien stood, picking up his phone. There's a difference. He left her alone in the kitchen, and Lila sat there for a long time, trying to process what he'd said, trying to decide if she should feel guilty or relieved or something else entirely. In the end, she just felt tired. That afternoon, Helen found her in the library again. Mrs. Blackwell, you have a visitor. Lila's heart sank. If it's my sister again, It's not. It's your mother. Somehow, that was worse. Lila followed Helen to the foyer where Evelyn Whitmore stood waiting, looking as polished and composed as ever. She wore a cream-colored suit and pearls, her hair perfectly styled, her expression carefully neutral. "Lila," Evelyn said, as if they were meeting for lunch instead of standing in the home of the man Evelyn had sold her daughter to. "You look well." "What do you want?" Lila asked. Evelyn's smile tightened. "I wanted to check on you. Make sure you're settling in. I'm fine." "Good, that's good." "Good." Evelyn glanced around the foyer, her eyes lingering on the expensive art, the marble floors, the chandelier that probably cost more than most people's cars. "This is quite a home. Mr. Blackwell has done well for himself." "I thought you said he was finished." Evelyn's expression flickered just for a second. "I may have been misinformed." "You lied." "I was working with the information I had." Evelyn's tone sharpened. "Don't take that tone with me, Lila. I'm still your mother." "You stopped being my mother the day you married me off to settle a debt." The words came out before Lila could stop them, and for a moment Evelyn just stared at her, shocked. Then her face hardened. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Everything I did was for this family, including you. You did it to get rid of me. I did it to give you a chance at a life we couldn't provide. You should be grateful." Lila laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Grateful? You threw me away like I was garbage. You didn't even ask if I wanted this. You didn't have a choice. Neither did you, apparently, or you wouldn't be here." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "I came here to make sure you understood your position. You're a Blackwell now. That comes with responsibilities, expectations, and you need to remember where you came from." "I know exactly where I came from," Lila said, "and I'm never going back." For a moment, Evelyn looked like she wanted to slap her. But then she took a breath, smoothed her suit, and forced her expression back into something civil. "We'll see," she said. "Enjoy your new life, Lila. I hope it's everything you think it will be." She turned and walked out, leaving Lila standing alone in the foyer, shaking. Damien found her there an hour later, still standing in the same spot, staring at the door her mother had walked through. "She came here?" he asked. Lila nodded. "What did she want?" "To remind me that I'm still hers." Damien's expression went cold. "You're not." "I know, but she doesn't." "Then I'll make sure she understands." He took Lila's hand, his grip firm and grounding. "Come on, you're done standing here." He led her upstairs to a room she hadn't seen before. It was smaller than the others, cozier, with a desk by the window and bookshelves lining the walls. There was a laptop on the desk, closed, and a stack of notebooks beside it. "This is yours," Damien said. "Your space. You can do whatever you want with it. Work, read, hide, whatever. But it's yours. Nobody else's." Lila looked around the room, something tight in her chest loosening just a little. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you need it, and because I can." It wasn't a romantic answer, but it was honest. And right now, honesty was the only thing Lila could trust. "Thank you," she said quietly. Damien nodded and left her alone. Lila sat down at the desk, running her hand over the smooth wood, and for the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe. The room became Lila's refuge over the next few weeks. She'd wake up, take her medication, eat breakfast with Damien when he was home, and then disappear into that small space with the desk and the window overlooking the gardens. She started writing, just random thoughts at first, things she'd never been allowed to say out loud. Then the thoughts turned into something more. Observations about her family, questions about Damien, fragments of a life she was only beginning to understand. Doctor. Monroe came twice a week now, monitoring Lila's progress with the new medication. The changes were undeniable. Lila's color improved. She stopped feeling like she was moving through water every time she tried to do something. Her appetite returned, slowly, and the weight she'd lost over years of being too sick to care started to come back. "You're responding better than I expected," Dr. Monroe said during one visit, reviewing the latest test results. "Your levels are stabilizing. I want to keep you on this protocol for another month. Then we'll reassess." "It's working," Lila said. It wasn't a question. "It is. But you need to keep being consistent. No skipping doses, no pushing yourself too hard. Your body's been through a lot." Lila nodded. She'd learned that lesson the hard way a week ago when she'd tried to go for a walk around the property and ended up exhausted after 20 minutes. Damien had found her sitting on a bench near the garden, breathing hard, and hadn't said a word. He'd just picked her up, carried her back to the house, and deposited her on the couch with a look that said, "Don't do that again." She hadn't, but the improvement was real, and it was changing things. Lila felt less like a ghost and more like a person. She started noticing details she'd been too tired to see before. The way Helen hummed when she worked. The sound of Damien's voice when he was on the phone in his office, clipped and dangerous. The fact that the garden outside her window had roses that bloomed in shades of cream and blush. Nothing bold, nothing that demanded attention. One morning, Damien came into the kitchen while Lila was eating breakfast and set a small box on the counter in front of her. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." She did. Inside was a phone, sleek, expensive, already set up. "You didn't have one," Damien said. "Now you do." Lila stared at it. "My mother took mine when I turned 18. She said I didn't need it." "Well, you do now. My number's already programmed in. So is Dr. Monroe's, Helen's, and a car service if you need to go anywhere." "Where would I go?" Damien leaned against the counter, watching her. "Wherever you want. You're not a prisoner here, Lila. You can leave the house. You just need to tell someone where you're going." "Why?" "Because you're my wife, and there are people who would be very interested in that fact." It was the first time he'd acknowledged that being married to him might come with risks. Lila looked down at the phone, feeling the weight of it in her hand. "What kind of people?" she asked. "The kind you don't need to worry about, as long as you're careful." It wasn't a real answer, but Lila didn't push. She'd learned that Damien only told her what he thought she needed to know, and arguing about it didn't change anything. That afternoon, she used the phone to text Dr. Monroe a question about her medication. The response came back within minutes, detailed and reassuring. Then she texted Helen to ask if there was tea in the house. Helen appeared 5 minutes later with a tray carrying 3 different kinds. It was a small thing, but it felt significant, like she had access to the world in a way she'd never been allowed before. The first crack in the fragile peace came on a Tuesday. Lila was in her room reading when she heard raised voices downstairs. She set the book aside and crept to the top of the stairs, listening. "I don't care what excuse you have. You failed." Damien's voice was cold, controlled, but there was something underneath it that made Lila's skin prickle. "And failure isn't something I tolerate. It won't happen again." The other voice was male, unfamiliar, shaking slightly. "You're right. It won't. Because you're done." There was a pause, then the sound of footsteps, a door opening and closing. Silence. Lila stayed where she was, her heart pounding. She'd never heard Damien sound like that. Angry, yes, but this was different. This was the voice of someone who didn't make threats. He made promises. When she finally went back to her room, she couldn't focus on the book anymore. She kept thinking about the man's voice, the fear in it, the way Damien had dismissed him like he was nothing. That night at dinner, she brought it up. "I heard you arguing with someone today," she said. Damien didn't look up from his plate. "You shouldn't eavesdrop." "I wasn't trying to. You were loud." "Fair enough." He set his fork down. "It was a work issue, nothing you need to worry about." "What kind of work do you do?" "The kind that doesn't come up at dinner." Lila frowned. "You keep saying I don't need to worry about things, but I'm married to you. Doesn't that mean I should know what I'm part of?" Damien studied her for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I run a network," he said finally. "Investments, acquisitions, security. Some of it's legitimate. Some of it operates in areas where the law gets flexible." "You mean illegal?" "I mean flexible. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. Illegal means breaking rules you agreed to follow. Flexible means operating in spaces where the rules don't apply yet." He picked up his wine glass, swirling the contents. "I don't deal drugs. I don't traffic people. I don't hurt anyone who doesn't deserve it. But I also don't play by the same rules your family does." "My family plays by rules?" Damien smiled, but it wasn't a kind expression. "Your family plays by the rules that benefit them and ignores the ones that don't. That's not integrity. That's hypocrisy with better PR." Lila couldn't argue with that. She'd seen enough of her family's double standards to know he was right. "So what does that make you?" she asked. "Honest about what I am, which is more than most people can say." It should have scared her. Maybe it would have, a month ago. But now, sitting across from him in a house he'd built with money earned from things she didn't fully understand, Lila found she wasn't afraid. Damien had never lied to her. He'd never pretended to be something he wasn't. And in a life where everyone had lied to her about everything, that counted for something. "Okay," she said. Damien raised an eyebrow. "Okay? I'm not going to ask for details, but if something happens that I should know about, you'll tell me, right? If it affects you, yes. Then that's enough." He looked at her like he was seeing something new, like she'd surprised him. Then he went back to his dinner, and they didn't talk about it again. The second crack came a week later, in the form of Lila's medication. She woke up one morning feeling off. Not sick, exactly, but wrong. Her stomach was uneasy, her head felt heavy, and there was a tremor in her hands that hadn't been there the day before. She took her pills like always, assuming it was just a bad morning, and tried to push through it. By noon, she was worse. The nausea was overwhelming, and she barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up everything she'd managed to eat for breakfast. Helen found her on the floor, pale and shaking, and immediately called Dr. Monroe. The doctor arrived within the hour, her expression tight with concern. She ran tests, checked Lila's vitals, and asked 100 questions that Lila could barely focus on. Finally, Dr. Monroe held up the pill bottle Lila had been taking from that morning. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "The bathroom, where I always keep it." Dr. Monroe opened the bottle and examined the pills inside. Her face went hard. "These aren't your medication," Lila blinked. "What?" "These are the wrong pills. Same bottle, same label, but the medication inside has been switched." Dr. Monroe's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made Lila's blood run cold. "Someone replaced your prescription with something else. Something that's making you sick." The room tilted. Lila gripped the edge of the couch, trying to process what she was hearing. "That's not possible," she said weakly. "Nobody's been in my room." "Someone has." Dr. Monroe set the bottle down and pulled out her phone. "I need to call your husband." Damien arrived home within 20 minutes. Lila had never seen him move that fast. He walked into the living room where she was lying on the couch, still feeling like her body was trying to turn itself inside out, and the look on his face made her stomach twist for a different reason. "Who's been in the house?" he asked Helen, his voice dangerously quiet. "Just the usual staff, sir, and Mrs. Whitmore's sister visited 3 days ago." Damien's jaw tightened. "Savannah was here?" "She said she wanted to drop off a gift for Mrs. Blackwell." "I didn't think—" "Where's the gift?" Helen hesitated. "In Mrs. Blackwell's bathroom. A candle, I believe." Damien was already moving. Lila tried to sit up, but Dr. Monroe put a hand on her shoulder. "Stay still. Let him handle it." A minute later, Damien came back down with the pill bottle in one hand and a small decorative bag in the other. He dumped the contents of the bag on the coffee table. A candle fell out, along with a card that said "Thinking of you" in Savannah's looping handwriting. "She switched the pills," Damien said, his voice flat. "She came here, brought a gift as a cover, and swapped out your medication while she was in your bathroom." Lila felt like she'd been punched. Why would she do that? Because she wants you gone. And if she can't get rid of you by sending you back to your family, she'll do it another way. Dr. Monroe stood, her expression furious. "This is attempted poisoning. We need to call the police." "No," Damien said. "Mr. Blackwell, I said no. The police won't do anything. It's her word against ours, and the Whitmores have enough money to make this disappear." He looked at Lila, and there was something in his eyes that she'd never seen before. Rage, barely controlled. "But that doesn't mean she gets away with it." "What are you going to do?" Lila asked. "What I should have done the first time she came here." He pulled out his phone and made a call. "It's me. I need you to pull everything you have on Savannah Whitmore. Financial records, communication logs, all of it, and I need it today." He hung up and turned back to Dr. Monroe. "Can you give Lila something to counteract whatever she was given?" "I can stabilize her, but she needs to be monitored for the next 24 hours. If there are any complications, then you'll be here to handle them." It wasn't a request, "Doctor. Monroe nodded and went to work. Damien sat down on the edge of the couch next to Lila, his hand resting on hers. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have seen this coming." "It's not your fault." "It is. I knew she was dangerous. I should have banned her from the property the first time she showed up." His grip tightened. "But I won't make that mistake again." Lila wanted to tell him not to do anything reckless, that it wasn't worth it. But the truth was, she was tired of people hurting her and getting away with it. Tired of being the victim everyone expected her to be. "What are you planning?" she asked. "To make sure she regrets ever stepping foot in my house." The next few days were a blur of doctors, tests, and Damien disappearing for hours at a time. Doctor. Monroe stayed close, monitoring Lila's recovery, adjusting her medication back to the correct prescription, and making sure there were no lasting effects from whatever Savannah had given her. By the third day, Lila was back to feeling normal, or at least as normal as she ever felt. Damien came home on the fourth night looking like he'd won a war. He found Lila in the library, curled up with a book, and sat down across from her. "It's done," he said. "What's done?" "Savannah's finished. I had my people dig into her life. Turns out, your sister's been living beyond her means for years. Credit card debt, unpaid loans, gambling problems she's been hiding from your parents. I bought every single one of those debts. As of this morning, I own her." Lila set her book down slowly. "What does that mean?" "It means she has two choices. She can pay me back, which she can't afford to do, or she can agree to stay away from you permanently. And I made it very clear which option I prefer." "And she agreed?" "She didn't have a choice. I also made sure your parents know exactly what she did. Evelyn tried to brush it off, but your father wasn't as forgiving. Apparently, attempted murder crosses even his very low bar for acceptable behavior." Lila didn't know how to feel. Part of her wanted to feel guilty, like she should be protecting her sister even after what Savannah had done. But the larger part of her just felt relieved. Savannah couldn't hurt her anymore. And for the first time in her life, someone had actually done something about it. "Thank you," she said quietly. Damien shook his head. "You don't thank me for this. This is what I'm supposed to do." "Still. Thank you." He stood, walked over to her, and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. It was brief, almost casual, but it was the first time he'd done anything like that. Lila sat very still, her heart pounding, not sure what it meant. "Get some rest," Damien said. "We have a gala to attend next week." "A gala?" "Business event. I need you there." "I don't know how to do that." "You'll figure it out. And if you don't, you'll fake it. Either way, you're coming." He left her alone with her book, but Lila couldn't focus on the words anymore. A gala meant people, crowds. Her family, probably, since these events always seemed to attract the same circle of wealthy, connected individuals who ran in the same circles as the Whitmores. The thought made her stomach turn. But Damien had asked, and for reasons she didn't fully understand, she didn't want to disappoint him. The week leading up to the gala was chaos. Helen brought in a stylist who measured Lila for a dress, asked her 1,000 questions about her preferences, and then ignored all of her answers in favor of something the stylist insisted was perfect. When the dress arrived 2 days before the event, Lila had to admit it was stunning. Deep emerald green, tailored to fit her exactly, with a neckline that was elegant without being revealing. "You'll look beautiful," Helen said, hanging the dress in Lila's closet. "I'll look terrified." "That too, but no one will notice if you keep your chin up." The night of the gala, Lila spent an hour getting ready with the help of a makeup artist Helen had hired. The woman worked in silence, transforming Lila's face into something polished and unfamiliar. When she was done, Lila barely recognized herself in the mirror. Damien was waiting downstairs, dressed in a black tuxedo that made him look even more dangerous than usual. When he saw her, he stopped mid-step, his eyes moving over her in a way that made Lila's cheeks flush. "You look good," he said. "So do you." "I always do." He offered her his arm. "Ready?" "No." "Good. Neither are they." The gala was held at a hotel downtown, in a ballroom that looked like it had been designed to make people feel small. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, tables draped in white linen. Everyone was dressed to impress, jewels glittering under the lights, laughter echoing off the high ceilings. Lila stayed close to Damien, her hand on his arm, trying not to look as overwhelmed as she felt. People kept approaching them, shaking Damien's hand, introducing themselves to Lila with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. She nodded, smiled back, said all the right things, even though she had no idea who any of these people were. And then she saw her family. They were standing near the bar, Evelyn in a champagne-colored gown, Richard in a tuxedo that matched Damien's, and Savannah in red, looking like she wanted to set the room on fire. When Evelyn saw Lila, her expression flickered with something that might have been surprise or anger. It was hard to tell. Savannah, on the other hand, looked like she'd seen a ghost. Damien noticed. "Do you want to leave?" "No," Lila said, surprising herself. "I want to stay." He smiled just a little. "Good." They made their way through the crowd and eventually, inevitably, ended up face to face with the Whitmores. Evelyn recovered first, her smile sliding into place like a mask. "Lila, you look well." "Thank you." "And Mr. Blackwell, how nice to see you again." "Mrs. Whitmore." Damien's tone was polite, but there was ice underneath it. "Enjoying the evening?" "Very much. Though I must say I'm surprised to see Lila here. I didn't think she was well enough for events like this." "She's fine," Damien said. "Better than fine, actually. The new medical team I brought in has done wonders." Evelyn's smile tightened. "How lovely." Savannah didn't say anything. She just stared at Lila, her expression unreadable, and Lila stared back, refusing to look away first. Richard cleared his throat. "Well, this is nice. Family reunion and all that." "Is it?" Damien's voice was sharp. "I wasn't aware attempted murder counted as family bonding." The silence that followed was suffocating. Evelyn's face went pale. Richard looked confused, and Savannah's expression twisted into something ugly. "I don't know what you're talking about," Savannah said. "Yes, you do, and so do they." Damien gestured to Evelyn and Richard. "I made sure of it." Evelyn stepped forward, her voice low and furious. "This is not the place." "You're right, it's not. But you made it the place when you raised a daughter who thought poisoning her sister was an acceptable solution to jealousy." People were starting to stare. Whispers rippled through the crowd, heads turning toward the confrontation unfolding near the bar. "We should go," Lila said quietly. But Damien wasn't done. "No, they need to hear this, all of them." He raised his voice just enough to carry. "The Whitmore family likes to present themselves as respectable, charitable. But the truth is they're willing to sacrifice their own daughter to save face. And when that didn't work, they tried to kill her." The whispers turned into murmurs. Evelyn looked like she wanted to disappear. Richard's face was red, whether from anger or embarrassment, Lila couldn't tell. And Savannah just stood there, shaking, her hands clenched into fists. "You have no proof," Evelyn hissed. "I have all the proof I need. And if you ever come near my wife again, I'll make sure everyone in this room knows exactly what kind of people you are." He turned, taking Lila's hand, and walked away. She followed, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. They didn't stop until they were outside, standing on the steps of the hotel, the cool night air washing over them. Lila's hands were shaking. Damien noticed and pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her in a way that felt protective and possessive all at once. "You didn't have to do that," Lila said. "Yes, I did. They'll never forgive you." "I don't want their forgiveness. I want them to leave you alone." Lila pulled back just enough to look up at him. "What if they don't?" Damien's expression was hard, unforgiving. "Then I'll make them." And standing there, wrapped in his arms, Lila believed him. The fallout from the gala came faster than Lila expected. By the next morning, her phone was buzzing with messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Social media accounts she didn't have were apparently talking about her. Helen brought her coffee and a tablet showing 3 different gossip sites with headlines that made Lila's stomach turn. Blackwell's mystery wife emerges from shadows. Whitmore family drama explodes at charity gala. Is Damien Blackwell's marriage built on revenge? Lila set the tablet down without reading further. Does he know about this? "He's the one who sent me to show you," Helen said. "He wanted you to see it before anyone else tried to tell you about it." "Where is he?" "Downstairs, in his office." Lila found him exactly where Helen said, sitting behind his desk with his laptop open and his phone pressed to his ear. He gestured for her to come in, finishing his conversation with a clipped "handle it" before hanging up. "You've seen the news," he said. "Some of it. It'll get worse before it gets better. Your family's already putting out statements, trying to control the narrative. They're claiming I manipulated you, that the marriage was coerced, that you're not well enough to make your own decisions." Lila's hands curled into fists. "They're lying." "Of course they are. But lies travel faster than truth, especially when the people telling them have money and connections." Damien closed his laptop. "I can kill the story if you want. Make a few calls, apply the right pressure. It'll disappear by tomorrow. And if we don't, then it plays out. People talk for a week, maybe two, then they move on to the next scandal. But your family will use every second of that time to paint you as a victim and me as the villain." Lila walked to the window, staring out at the gardens. The roses were still blooming, perfect and untouchable, like nothing beyond these walls could affect them. "I don't want you to make it disappear," she said quietly. Damien stood. "You sure about that? Let them talk. Let people see what they are." She turned to face him. "You were right last night. They've been hiding behind respectability for too long. Maybe it's time someone called them out." Something shifted in Damien's expression. Pride, maybe, or respect. "You're stronger than they gave you credit for." "I'm angry. There's a difference. Anger's a good start." He was right. Lila had spent so long being passive, letting things happen to her, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to actually fight back. But standing here now, watching her family scramble to protect their reputation while throwing her under the bus again, she realized she was done being the person they'd taught her to be. Over the next week, the story evolved. Articles appeared quoting unnamed sources close to the Whitmore family, all saying the same thing in different words. Lila was fragile, mentally unstable, being controlled by a dangerous man. Evelyn gave an interview to a lifestyle magazine, tears in her eyes, talking about how worried she was for her daughter's safety. "She's not herself," Evelyn said in the piece, which Helen reluctantly showed to Lila over breakfast. "Marriage should be a choice made freely, with a clear mind. I'm not sure Lila was capable of that." Lila read the words twice, feeling something crack inside her chest. Not sadness, not even hurt, just a cold, clarifying rage that made everything else seem very simple. "I want to do an interview," she said. Helen nearly dropped the tablet. "Mrs. Blackwell, I want to tell my side. They don't get to be the only voices people hear. Damien won't like this. Then he can tell me himself." Damien did in fact have opinions. He came home that evening to find Lila in the library, researching journalists who might be willing to listen to her story. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, looking less angry and more calculating. "You want to go public," he said. "They're already making me public. I just want to control what gets said. You understand this won't stop them. It'll make them come at you harder." "Let them." Lila closed her laptop. "I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of letting them decide who I am." Damien walked into the room, sitting down across from her. "If you do this, you need to be ready for what comes next. They'll dig into everything, your medical history, your childhood, every moment you've ever been vulnerable, and they'll use it against you. They already are. Not like this. Right now you're a footnote in their story. If you speak up, you become the main character, and that comes with a target on your back." Lila met his gaze, steady and sure. "I know, but I'd rather have a target on my back than be invisible." Damien studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. "It's Blackwell. I need you to set up a meeting with Rachel Chen at the Tribune. Full interview, on the record, with my wife, and I want it done this week." He hung up and looked at Lila. "You're going to do this right. Professional journalist, reputable outlet, full editorial control before it goes to print. No ambush questions, no hidden agendas. Understood?" "Understood. And I'll be there with you." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. You're about to walk into a fight, and I don't let you do that alone." The interview was scheduled for 3 days later. In the meantime, Lila prepared. She wrote down everything she wanted to say, every truth her family had buried, every lie they'd told to make themselves look better. Damien helped her refine it, cutting out the parts that were too emotional, too raw. focusing on facts that could be verified and statements that couldn't be twisted. Don't give them anything they can use against you, he said, reading over her notes. Stay calm, stay factual, and don't let them bait you into saying something you'll regret. I won't. And if it gets too hard, we stop. You don't owe anyone the whole story. But Lila wanted to tell the whole story, or at least enough of it that people would understand what her family had done. Not for sympathy, not for pity, just for the truth. Rachel Chen turned out to be exactly what Damien had promised. Professional, sharp, with a reputation for asking hard questions but treating her subjects fairly. She arrived at the house with a photographer and a recording device, settling into the living room like she had done this 1,000 times before. Thank you for agreeing to this, Rachel said, setting up her equipment. I know it can't be easy. It's not, Lila admitted, but it's necessary. The interview started with basics, how Lila and Damien had met, what the marriage had been like, how she was adjusting to her new life. Lila answered carefully, aware that every word would be analyzed, picked apart, used as evidence for whatever narrative people wanted to believe. Then Rachel shifted gears. Your mother recently gave an interview suggesting you weren't in a position to consent to this marriage. What's your response to that? Lila took a breath. My mother has spent my entire life deciding what I'm capable of. She decided I was too sick to have a normal childhood, too weak to make my own choices, too much of a burden to be worth the effort. So when she says I wasn't capable of consenting to this marriage, what she really means is that I didn't make the choice she wanted me to make. Which was? To disappear quietly, to accept being married off to someone she thought was ruined and broken, and to fade into the background like I always had. But I didn't. I'm still here, and that's what bothers her. Rachel made a note. Your sister Savannah recently filed a restraining order against your husband, claiming he threatened her. Can you speak to that? Damien tensed beside her, but Lila kept her voice even. My sister came to this house and tampered with my medication. She replaced my prescription with something that made me violently ill. When my husband found out, he made it clear she wasn't welcome here anymore. If she considers that a threat, that says more about her than it does about him. Do you have proof of this tampering? Yes. Medical records, the swapped medication, documentation from my doctor. All of it's been turned over to our legal team. Rachel's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't comment. She just moved to the next question. There's been speculation that your husband's wealth was exaggerated, that he's not the powerful figure people believed him to be. How do you respond to that? Lila almost laughed. You're sitting in his house right now. Does this look like someone who's struggling financially? Fair point. The interview went on for another hour. Rachel asked about Lila's health, her relationship with her parents, her plans for the future. Lila answered honestly, not sugarcoating anything but also not indulging in dramatics. By the time they finished, she felt wrung out, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with her medical condition. Rachel packed up her equipment, shaking both their hands. This will run early next week. I'll send you a draft before publication so you can verify the quotes. Thank you, Lila said. After Rachel left, Damien pulled Lila into his arms, holding her tightly. You did good. I feel like I just threw a grenade into my own life. You did. But it was the right move. The article came out 4 days later. The headline read, Lila Blackwell Speaks, the daughter the Whitmores wanted to forget. It was fair, balanced, and devastating. Rachel had included Lila's account of the medication tampering, the marriage arrangement, the years of neglect. She'd also reached out to the Whitmores for comment, and their responses only made them look worse. Evelyn's statement was cold and dismissive. We've always wanted what's best for Lila. If she feels otherwise, that's unfortunate, but it doesn't reflect reality. Richard declined to comment. Savannah's lawyer issued a statement denying all allegations and threatening legal action. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with people taking sides, dissecting every detail, demanding accountability. Some defended the Whitmores, calling Lila ungrateful and manipulative. But more people believed her, believed that a family capable of arranging a marriage to settle a debt was also capable of everything else she described. Within a week, the Whitmore family's carefully constructed image began to crumble. Donors pulled funding from their charitable foundation. Business partners started distancing themselves. Society events that would have once welcomed them with open arms suddenly had no room on the guest list. Lila watched it happen from the safety of Damien's house, feeling a complicated mix of satisfaction and guilt. She'd wanted them to face consequences, but seeing it actually happen was different than imagining it. "You okay?" Damien asked one evening, finding her on the couch, staring at her phone. "I don't know. I thought this would feel better." Revenge usually doesn't, but justice does. And that's what this is. Is it? Or did I just destroy my family out of spite? Damien sat down beside her, taking the phone out of her hands. You told the truth. What they did with that truth is on them. You don't get to carry their guilt. He was right. Lila knew he was right, but it didn't make it easier. 2 weeks after the article ran, Richard Whitmore showed up at the house. Helen found Lila in the garden and told her he was waiting in the foyer, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Do you want me to send him away?" Helen asked. Lila thought about it, then shook her head. "No, I'll see him." Richard stood near the door, hands in his pockets, looking older than Lila remembered. The stern, detached man she'd grown up with seemed smaller now, diminished somehow. "Lila," he said when he saw her, "what do you want?" "To talk, just for a few minutes." She gestured to the sitting room. They sat across from each other, the silence heavy and uncomfortable. "Your mother's not doing well," Richard said finally. "The foundation's collapsing. Our friends won't return her calls. Savannah's lawyer bills are piling up, and the restraining order isn't helping." "I didn't ask for an update on your problems." "I know, but I thought you should know the impact this is having." Lila crossed her arms. "You mean the impact of telling the truth? The consequences of your own actions?" Richard flinched. "We did what we thought was best." "You did what was easiest. There's a difference." "Maybe." He rubbed his face, looking exhausted. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. For all of it. For not protecting you when I should have. For letting your mother make decisions I knew were wrong. For failing you as a father." The apology hung in the air between them. Lila wanted to feel something. Relief, maybe, or vindication, but all she felt was tired. "I appreciate you saying that," she said quietly. "But it doesn't change anything." "I know. And I'm not coming back, not to the estate, not to the family, not to any of it. That part of my life is over." Richard nodded slowly. "I understand, but if you ever need anything, I won't." He stood, and for a moment he looked like he wanted to say something else. But then he just nodded again and walked to the door. Lila didn't get up to see him out. She just sat there, alone in the sitting room, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened settle over her. Damien found her there an hour later. "Helen said your father was here." "He was. He apologized." "Do you believe him?" "I think he meant it, but it doesn't matter." Damien sat down beside her, pulling her close. "You don't have to forgive them." "I know. And I don't think I will. Not now, anyway. Maybe not ever." "That's okay. You get to decide what comes next, not them." Lila leaned into him, letting herself be held. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe. But the war wasn't over yet. 3 days later, Evelyn made her move. It started with a lawsuit. Lila was served papers at the house, a legal complaint alleging that Damien had coerced her into the marriage, manipulated her medical care, and isolated her from her family. The suit demanded an annulment and asked for Lila to be placed under a temporary conservatorship while her mental competency was evaluated. Lila read the documents twice, her hands shaking with rage. "She's trying to have me declared incompetent," she said, showing the papers to Damien. His expression went cold. "She's trying to take control of you again. But it's not going to work." "How do you know?" "Because we have documentation, medical records from Dr. Monroe showing you're stable and improving. The interview you gave, which was clear and coherent, and the fact that you've been making your own decisions for months now without any issues." He took the papers from her. "I'll have our lawyers file a response. This will be dismissed. And if it's not, then we go to court and bury them with evidence. But it won't come to that." He was right. The lawsuit was dismissed within 2 weeks, the judge calling it a transparent attempt to harass and control an adult woman who had shown no signs of incompetency. Evelyn's lawyer tried to appeal, but that was thrown out too. The legal defeat seemed to break something in Evelyn. She stopped making public statements, stopped giving interviews. The Whitmore Foundation officially dissolved, its remaining assets distributed to other charities, and the family itself seemed to retreat from public life entirely, nursing their wounds in private. Lila should have felt victorious, but mostly she just felt relieved. The fight was over, and she'd won. Not because she'd destroyed them, but because she'd survived them. One evening, a month after the lawsuit was dismissed, Lila found herself back in the garden, sitting on the same bench where Damien had found her after her failed walk. The roses were still blooming, and the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Damien joined her, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched. "You've been quiet today," he said. "Just thinking." "About?" "Everything. How different my life is now compared to 6 months ago." "Better or worse?" Lila considered the question. 6 months ago, she'd been trapped in a house where nobody wanted her, married off to a stranger, convinced she'd never be anything more than a burden. Now she was sitting in a garden that felt like home, next to a man who'd fought for her when nobody else would, healthier than she'd been in years. "Better," she said. "Definitely better." Damien smiled, and it was the most genuine expression she'd ever seen on his face. "Good." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sky change colors. Then Damien reached over and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "I need to tell you something," he said. Lila's heart skipped. "What?" "When I married you, it was strategic, a way to settle a debt and prove a point. I didn't expect to actually care about you. And now? Now I do. Care about you, I mean. More than I thought I would. More than I probably should." Lila turned to look at him, searching his face for any sign he was lying, but all she saw was honesty. Raw, uncomfortable honesty. "I care about you too," she said quietly. "I don't know when it happened, but it did." "Is that okay?" "I think so. I'm still figuring it out." Damien pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Take your time. We're not going anywhere." And sitting there, wrapped in his arms while the sun disappeared below the horizon, Lila believed him. For the first time in her life, she believed in something good, something real, something that was hers. The next morning, Lila woke up feeling different. Not sick, not tired, just present, alive in a way she'd never been before. She got dressed, ate breakfast with Damien, and then made a decision. "I want to do something," she said. "Like what?" "I don't know yet, but I want to do something that matters, something that's mine." Damien set down his coffee. "What are you thinking?" "Maybe a foundation, something that helps people like me. People who've been written off by their families, who need medical care they can't afford, who need someone to actually give a damn about them." "That's a good idea." "You think so?" "I think you'd be good at it. You know what it's like to be on the other side of that equation, and you have the resources now to actually make a difference." Lila felt something warm spread through her chest. Hope, maybe. Or purpose. She wasn't sure which, but it felt good. "Will you help me?" she asked. "Of course. Whatever you need." They spent the next few weeks building the foundation from the ground up. Lawyers, accountants, medical advisors, all brought in to make sure it was done right. Lila threw herself into the work, learning everything she could about nonprofit management, fundraising, grant applications. It was exhausting and overwhelming and absolutely worth it. The Whitmore Foundation had been about appearances, about making the family look good while doing the bare minimum. Lila's foundation would be different. It would be about actually helping people. And it would be named after the woman she'd become, not the girl she used to be. The Blackwell Medical Trust launched 3 months later, with a mission to provide comprehensive care to patients with chronic illnesses whose families couldn't or wouldn't support them. The first grant recipient was a young woman who reminded Lila of herself. Too sick to work, abandoned by everyone who should have cared, barely hanging on. Lila met her in person, listened to her story, and promised her that things would get better. And then she made sure they did. Standing in the foundation's office on opening day, surrounded by people who believed in what they were building, Lila felt something she'd never felt before. Pride. Not in who her family was, but in who she'd become despite them. The foundation grew faster than Lila had anticipated. Within 6 months, they'd helped 43 people, provided over $200,000 in medical assistance, and built a network of doctors who volunteered their time because they believed in what the trust was doing. Lila spent her days meeting with patients, reviewing applications, working with the board to expand their reach. It was exhausting work, but it was hers. And that made all the difference. Damien watched the transformation with something that looked like satisfaction. He'd step back from his own work to attend foundation events, stand beside Lila during press conferences, make calls to contacts who could help expand their donor base. He never took credit for any of it, always deflecting attention back to Lila when reporters asked about his involvement. "This is her project," he'd say. "I'm just making sure she has what she needs to succeed." But Lila knew it was more than that. Damien had given her the resources, the connections, the confidence to believe she could actually do this. Without him, the foundation would have been just another good idea that never got off the ground. One evening, after a particularly long day of grant reviews, Lila came home to find Damien in the kitchen actually cooking, or attempting to. There was pasta boiling over on the stove, sauce splattered on the counter, and what looked like the remains of a salad scattered across the cutting board. "What are you doing?" she asked, trying not to laugh. "Making dinner. Or trying to." He turned off the burner before the pot could overflow completely. "Helen's off tonight, and I thought I'd surprise you." "You surprised me. I didn't know you could cook." "I can't, that's the surprise." Lila walked over and surveyed the damage. The pasta was overcooked, the sauce was burnt in places, and the salad looked like it had been attacked rather than prepared. But the effort was there, clumsy and imperfect, and somehow endearing. "We could order in," she suggested. "We could. Or you could teach me how to fix this." They spent the next hour salvaging what they could, laughing over Damien's complete lack of kitchen skills, ending up with something that was barely edible but felt more meaningful than any expensive meal they'd had at a restaurant. They ate at the kitchen island, trading stories about their day, falling into an easy rhythm that felt less like a strategic alliance and more like an actual marriage. "I like this," Lila said, setting down her fork. "The food, because I'm pretty sure it's terrible. No, this, us, being normal for once." Damien reached across the counter and took her hand. "We're never going to be normal." "I know, but we can pretend sometimes." "Fair enough." The moment was interrupted by Damien's phone buzzing on the counter. He glanced at the screen and his expression shifted into something harder. "I need to take this," he said, standing up. "Everything okay?" "It will be." He disappeared into his office, and Lila was left alone with the ruins of their dinner. She cleaned up the kitchen, trying not to worry about whatever had pulled Damien away. His work was still largely a mystery to her, something she'd chosen not to dig into too deeply because she wasn't sure she wanted to know the full truth. When he came back 20 minutes later, his expression was unreadable. "We have a problem," he said. Lila's stomach dropped. "What kind of problem?" "Your family's making another move. Not legal this time. Financial." "What do you mean?" Damien pulled up something on his phone and showed it to her. It was a news article about the Whitmore estate being put up for sale, along with several other properties the family owned. "They're liquidating assets," Damien said, "which means they're either trying to hide money or they're preparing for something big." "Like what?" "Like trying to buy their way back into relevance, or funding another attack on you." Lila stared at the article, her mind racing. "I thought we were done with this." "So did I, but your mother's more stubborn than I gave her credit for." The next few days were tense. Damien had people monitoring the Whitmore family's financial movements, tracking every transaction, every transfer, looking for patterns that might reveal what they were planning. Lila tried to focus on the foundation, but it was hard when she kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. It came in the form of an anonymous tip to a major newspaper, claiming that the Blackwell Medical Trust was being used to launder money from Damien's criminal enterprises. The accusation was baseless, easily disproven with their meticulously kept financial records, but the damage was immediate. Donors started pulling back. Grant applications slowed. The board called an emergency meeting to discuss damage control. Lila sat in that meeting, listening to lawyers and PR experts debate how to respond, and felt the familiar weight of helplessness settling over her. Her family had found a way to hurt her again, this time by attacking the one thing she'd built that was truly hers. "We need to issue a statement," one of the lawyers said. "Full transparency, open our books, show there's nothing to hide." "No, that won't be enough," another board member argued. We need an independent audit. Prove beyond any doubt that the allegations are false. Both, Lila said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. We do both, she continued, her voice getting stronger. Statement, audit, and I do another interview. On camera this time. Let people see me defending what we've built. Mrs. Blackwell, that might not be wise. I don't care if it's wise. I care if it works. She stood up, addressing the room. This foundation matters. The people we help matter, and I'm not letting my family destroy it because they can't accept that I've moved on. The room was silent for a moment. Then the lead lawyer nodded. All right, we'll set it up. The interview was scheduled for 2 days later, broadcast live on a national morning show. Lila spent the time in between preparing, going over talking points with the communications team, rehearsing answers to questions she hoped wouldn't be asked, but knew would be. Damien stayed close, reviewing her notes, offering suggestions, making sure she was ready. You don't have to do this, he said the night before the broadcast. Yes, I do. You could let the lawyers handle it, release a statement, and move on. That's not enough. People need to see that I'm not hiding, that I believe in what we're doing. Damien pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. You're going to be great. How do you know? Because you've been great at everything you've done since I met you. This won't be any different. The morning of the interview, Lila woke up with her stomach in knots. She got dressed in a navy blazer and white blouse, simple and professional, the kind of outfit that said she was serious without trying too hard. The makeup artist came and went, Helen fussed over her hair, and then it was time to go. The studio was bright and cold, with cameras positioned at angles that made Lila feel exposed. The host was a woman named Jennifer Park, professional and friendly, with a reputation for being fair but direct. She shook Lila's hand, went over the format one more time, and then the cameras were rolling. We're here with Lila Blackwell, founder of the Blackwell Medical Trust, which has recently come under scrutiny following allegations of financial impropriety, Jennifer began. Mrs. Blackwell, thank you for joining us. Thank you for having me. Let's address the allegations directly. Anonymous sources claim your foundation is being used to launder money. What's your response? Lila looked straight into the camera, her voice steady. The allegations are completely false. The Blackwell Medical Trust operates with full transparency. We've already initiated an independent audit, and we're opening our financial records to public review. Every dollar we receive goes toward helping patients who need medical care they can't afford. That's our mission, and we take it seriously. You believe these allegations are personally motivated? I know they are. My family has been trying to undermine me since I left their control. When legal challenges didn't work, they turned to character assassination. This is just the latest attempt. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth, and I have documentation to back it up. Jennifer leaned forward. Your critics say you're using your husband's wealth and connections to avoid accountability. How do you respond to that? My husband provided seed funding for the foundation, yes, but every decision, every grant, every program we've implemented has been reviewed by an independent board. I don't avoid accountability. I welcome it. That's why we're doing the audit. The interview went on for another 10 minutes, Jennifer asking tough questions, Lila answering with a combination of facts and conviction. By the time it ended, Lila felt wrung out but clear. She'd said what needed to be said, and she'd said it without flinching. The response was immediate. Social media exploded with support. Donors who'd pulled back started reaching out again, and within a week, the independent audit confirmed what Lila had been saying all along. The foundation was clean. Every transaction was legitimate. The allegations had been nothing more than a smear campaign. The newspaper that had run the original story issued a retraction and an apology. And the anonymous source was eventually traced back to a shell company owned by Evelyn Whitmore. Damien showed Lila the evidence one evening, his expression grim. Your mother paid $50,000 to plant that story, he said, and now it's blown up in her face. Lila stared at the documents, feeling a complicated mix of anger and exhaustion. When does this end? It ends when we make it end. How? Damien set the papers down and looked at her. We could go after her, file charges for defamation, harassment, conspiracy, bury her in legal fees and criminal investigations until she has nothing left. Or we let it go. Accept that she's damaged herself more than we ever could and move on with our lives. Lila thought about it. The vindictive part of her wanted revenge, wanted to see Evelyn pay for every horrible thing she'd done. But the part of her that had been building something new, something good, just wanted peace. "I want to move on," she said finally. "I'm done fighting her. I'm done letting her have power over my life." Damien nodded slowly. "Then that's what we'll do. But if she comes at me again, if she comes at you again, I'll handle it, and it won't be gentle." That was enough. Lila let herself believe it was over, that the worst was finally behind them. The final confrontation came 3 months later, at a place Lila hadn't expected. The Whitmore estate, which had been on the market for months, finally sold. The new owners were doing renovations, and someone found a box of old documents hidden in the attic. Documents that detailed years of financial fraud, bribery, and illegal business dealings orchestrated by Richard and Evelyn Whitmore. The police got involved. Federal investigators. The whole thing unraveled faster than anyone could have predicted. Richard was arrested at his office. Evelyn tried to flee but was picked up at the airport. Savannah, who'd apparently been complicit in some of the schemes, turned herself in with a lawyer. Lila found out about it from the news, watching the coverage with a sense of unreality. This was her family. The people who'd raised her, who'd taught her what family was supposed to look like, and they were being led away in handcuffs. Damien came home to find her sitting on the couch, staring at the television. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't know. Should I be happy about this?" "You should feel however you feel." "I feel nothing. Is that bad?" Damien sat down beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "It's honest, and that's all that matters." The trial took 6 months. Lila didn't attend, but she followed the news coverage, watching her family's empire crumble piece by piece. Richard was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and bribery. Evelyn was convicted of conspiracy and embezzlement. Savannah took a plea deal that kept her out of prison but left her with a criminal record and community service. When it was over, the Whitmore name was synonymous with scandal. The estate was seized to pay restitution. The remaining assets were liquidated. Everything they'd built, everything they'd protected so fiercely, was gone. Lila received a letter from her father during his first month in prison. She almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of her. The letter was short. An apology, an acknowledgement of everything he'd done wrong, a hope that someday she might be able to forgive him. It was the most honest thing he'd ever written to her. Lila read it twice, then put it in a drawer and didn't think about it again for a long time. Life moved on. The foundation continued to grow, expanding to 3 cities, helping hundreds of people who'd been abandoned by their families the way Lila had been. She hired a full-time staff, delegated responsibilities, and learned how to be a leader instead of just a survivor. Damien's business evolved too. He started pulling back from the shadier aspects of his work, investing more in legitimate ventures, building something that could last without constantly looking over his shoulder. He didn't talk about it much, but Lila noticed the changes. Fewer late-night calls, fewer meetings that required him to leave town on short notice, more evenings at home. One night, a year and a half after the wedding, Lila came home from a foundation event to find Damien waiting for her with dinner already made. Not burnt pasta this time, but actual food, prepared by a chef he'd hired for the evening. "What's the occasion?" she asked. "Does there need to be one?" "With you?" "Usually." Damien smiled and pulled out her chair. "Sit." They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that came from knowing someone well enough that words weren't always necessary. After dinner, Damien poured wine and led her out to the terrace overlooking the city. "I need to tell you something," he said. Lila's heart skipped. "That sounds ominous." "It's not. At least, I hope it's not." He set his glass down and turned to face her. "When I married you, it was transactional, a means to an end. I didn't expect to actually fall in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. Lila's breath caught. "But I did," Damien continued. "Somewhere between watching you stand up to your family and building something meaningful out of nothing, I fell in love with you, and I need you to know that." Lila set her own glass down, her hands trembling. "I love you too." "Yeah?" "Yeah, I have for a while. I just didn't know how to say it." Damien pulled her close, kissing her in a way that felt different from every other time. Not strategic, not careful, just real. When they pulled apart, Lila was smiling. "So what now?" Now we live our lives, build our future, figure out what comes next together. Sounds good to me. The next 2 years were the best of Lila's life. She and Damien settled into a real marriage, one built on trust and partnership instead of necessity. They traveled together, worked together, learned how to fight without destroying each other and make up without pretending the fight hadn't happened. It wasn't perfect. Some days were hard, some arguments were brutal, and there were moments when Lila still struggled with the aftermath of everything her family had put her through. But it was real, and that made it worth fighting for. The foundation became Lila's legacy. By its third anniversary, they'd helped over 1,000 people, partnered with 15 hospitals, and created a model that other organizations were starting to replicate. Lila was asked to speak at conferences, write articles for medical journals, serve on boards for organizations doing similar work. She said yes to the things that mattered and no to everything else. Dr. Monroe remained her doctor, checking in regularly, adjusting her treatment as needed. Lila's health was never perfect, but it was stable, managed, no longer the crisis it had been for so much of her life. She had good days and bad days, and she'd learned to accept both. Helen stayed on as household manager, becoming less of an employee and more of a friend. She was the one who noticed when Lila started feeling sick in the mornings, the one who quietly left a pregnancy test on the bathroom counter with a note that said, "Just in case." Lila took the test on a Tuesday morning, staring at the positive result with a mix of disbelief and wonder. She'd never thought she'd be healthy enough to have children, never imagined her body could handle something like pregnancy. But Dr. Monroe confirmed it a week later, running tests and scans and declaring Lila cautiously optimistic. "It's going to be high risk," Dr. Monroe warned. "We'll need to monitor you closely, adjust your medications, be prepared for complications. But it's possible," Lila told Damien that night over dinner. He'd just taken a bite of food when she said, "I'm pregnant," and he nearly choked. "You're what?" "Pregnant. About 8 weeks." Damien set down his fork, staring at her. "Are you sure?" "Very sure." Dr. Monroe confirmed it. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he stood up, walked around the table, and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "We're having a baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We're having a baby." The pregnancy was difficult. Lila spent weeks on bed rest, dealing with complications that Dr. Monroe had warned about, but that still felt overwhelming when they actually happened. Damien hired a team of specialists, converted one of the guest rooms into a medical suite, and personally made sure Lila followed every restriction, every guideline, every piece of advice the doctors gave. There were moments when Lila wondered if her body would fail her again, if she'd lose the baby before she ever got to meet them. But somehow she made it through. Week by week, month by month, until finally, 7.5 months into the pregnancy, her daughter was born. They named her Elena. She was small, born early but healthy, with Damien's dark hair and Lila's gray eyes. Lila held her for the first time in a hospital room filled with machines and monitors, and felt something shift inside her chest. This tiny person, this perfect little human, was hers, and nobody could take that away. Damien stood beside the bed, staring at Elena like he was seeing a miracle. "She's beautiful," he said. "She's ours." "Yeah, she is." 18 months later, Lila gave birth to their son, Alexander. The second pregnancy was easier, or maybe Lila was just better prepared. Alexander came into the world screaming, healthy and strong, with an attitude that suggested he was going to be trouble. "He's definitely yours," Lila told Damien, exhausted but happy. "He's definitely ours," Damien corrected. Raising 2 children while running a foundation and managing a complicated life was harder than Lila had anticipated. There were days when she felt like she was barely holding it together, when the weight of everything threatened to crush her. But she had help. Damien was a hands-on father, up with the kids in the middle of the night, changing diapers, reading stories, doing all the things Lila had never imagined him doing. Helen became a surrogate grandmother, spoiling the children and making sure Lila didn't forget to take care of herself. And the foundation kept growing, now with a pediatric wing dedicated to helping children with chronic illnesses, ensuring no child would ever feel like the burden Lila had been made to feel. 5 years after the wedding, Lila stood in the foundation's main office, looking at a wall covered with photos of the people they'd helped. Each photo told a story. Each story was proof that what they were doing mattered. Damien came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Proud of yourself? He asked. I am. Is that okay? It's more than okay. You've earned it. Lila leaned back against him, taking in the moment. Her life wasn't perfect. She still had hard days, still struggled with her health sometimes, still carried scars from the family that had tried to break her. But she'd built something good, something real, something that would outlast all the pain. Do you ever think about them? Damien asked quietly. Your family. Sometimes, not as much as I used to. Any regrets? Lila thought about it. About the girl she used to be, trapped in a house where nobody wanted her. About the family that had seen her as disposable. About all the ways her life could have gone differently if she'd stayed silent, stayed small, stayed the person they'd wanted her to be. No, she said finally. No regrets. Because the truth was, leaving that family had been the best thing she'd ever done. Walking away from people who would never value her had given her the space to become someone she actually liked. And marrying Damien, the man everyone said was ruined, had given her a life more valuable than anything the Whitmores could have offered. Her children would never know what it felt like to be unwanted. They would grow up in a home filled with love, support, and parents who chose to be there. They would never be bargaining chips or burdens or things to be hidden away. That night, after the kids were asleep and the house was quiet, Lila and Damien sat together on the terrace, looking out at the city lights below. I've been thinking, Damien said. About? Retiring. From the parts of my work that keep me looking over my shoulder. Lila turned to look at him. Really? Really, I've built enough, made enough, and I want to spend more time with you and the kids, maybe even help with the foundation if you'll have me. I'll have you. Damien smiled. Good. Because I'm not going anywhere.